Shabbat Shalom, friends. It's good to see all of you. It's obviously a lot of news, a lot of happenings, and time for us to breathe, to bring in the spirit and soul of Shabbat and come together as a community. And we'll begin with the singing of, what are we starting with, Cantor? What's our opening song?
Well, why don't we welcome the angels around us in our midst and sing these words of Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boechem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Barchuni leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeitzchem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
As we gather together into community, even though we come from all our separate places, we recognize that there is a unity in community. And so as we turn to the words of the Shema that reminds us that there's one God in the universe, that we are all within God in the universe, that we are all one, we sing the words of Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malechuto Leolam Moed.
The Mi Chamocha is one of those prayers that I know each and every one of you knows. And so sing it out loud, sing it with joy. Imagine crossing the sea from slavery to freedom. Mi Chamocha.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. Nora tehilot osef ele, Nora tehilot osef ele, Adonai imloch leolam vaed. Ay la la ay la 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 la. Ay la 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 la. Ay la 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 la. Ay la 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 la. Nora tehilot osef ele, Nora tehilot osef ele, Adonai imloch leolam vaed.
As we pause for a moment of private prayer, I'd like to reflect on the verse from Psalm 118 that I say so often. This is the day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It's a subtle verse in some ways, right? This is the day that God has made. God that makes good days and bad days. There are difficult times and good times, but no matter what the day brings, we try to bring a cheerful face to it. We try to rejoice and be glad in even the difficult times. And so we pause for a moment of private prayer, perhaps to remember that we have blessings in our lives, even in times of difficulty and darkness. We pause for a moment of private prayer. Please feel free to put us on pause and take all the time you need to reflect and say your own thoughts and prayers on this Shabbat.
And as we pray about accepting, learning from, acknowledging the good and the bad, the full range of experience, we're reminded that the word shalom is more than just an idea of peace. It's a sense of wholeness, a sense of completion. And so we bring that sense of shalom into our hearts and into the world with these words of our prayer for peace, for wholeness, the words of Oseh Shalom Bimromav. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu, Be'al Kol Yisrael, Be'imru, Amen. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael.
This world is in need of healing. And I think right now you may be feeling something similar to what I'm feeling. I imagine Cantor and Rabbi Sarada are also feeling that this is feeling a little old, a little difficult. We wish we could be in person, singing together. And yet we know that Jewish value of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life. And we know that we need savlanut, we need patience. And while patience can feel like suffering, savlanut means suffering also. It's something we do because we are created in the image of God and we're here to sustain life and to heal others and to heal our world. And we think of all those who are in need of healing, our friends and family, those suffering from this pandemic, those suffering mental health-wise, spiritually, physically. We think of all of them now as we sing the Misha Berach prayer.
Misha Berach Imoteinu Mekor bracha la'avoteinu. May the source of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imoteinu mekora bracha le'avoteinu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
We say Mishaberach for the healing of all the people. In the way we say Mishaberach for the planet when we say our weekly prayer for our planet. Dear God, help us celebrate your awesome creation and all the life on the wondrous planet Earth. Help us feel connected to all of life on this small blue planet. Life is living us. Creator of the universe, help us understand that to master our world means to take responsibility not only for ourselves, but for all the creatures on Earth. Help us use the power you gave us to build a better living world and not casually destroy the beauty we have borrowed from our children. We are the Stewards, your partners in creation. We call on you for help and guidance. Our God, God of our ancestors and of our children, in this time of climate crisis, help us preserve life, protect it, and defend it. We owe it to our children, those born and those yet to be. If not for us, then for them, dear God. Guide us on our journey. So I mentioned that sometimes we have to find the sweet even in times of darkness. And so this past week, Céline and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. Not quite in the style we were expecting to. We actually had hoped to be on a congregational trip to Cuba this week and to take everybody on the trip out for dinner in our favorite restaurant in Havana to celebrate. So we'll have to put that off maybe to the 31st or the 32nd wedding anniversary, but we still managed to grab some joy. We actually took on the morning of our anniversary, we took some time off and went on a walking tour featuring the architecture of Mies van der Rohe, one of the creators of modernist architecture. Mies lived and taught in Chicago for the second half of his life. He was a refugee from Hitler's Europe. And he and some of his colleagues were looking for a new vocabulary for architecture in the 20th century, something that was not beholden to anything in the past. They hit upon what Mies came to call skin and bones architecture. They built buildings without ornamentation, boxes of glass and steel, symmetrical and geometric designs where the bones of steel and the skin of glass is fully visible, really the only thing that you see. I'm struck by this idea of creating a new vocabulary for architecture. And perhaps there are moments in religious history that parallel this approach. When Abraham sets out on his journey from Haran, as he did in our Torah portion a couple of weeks ago, he is doing no less than creating a new vocabulary for faith. He leaves behind the old ways to begin something new. And perhaps we see something similar in the birth of the Reform movement in Germany in the 19th century. Samuel Holdheim, who was one of the early supporters of Reform, speaks of this new vocabulary when he boldly says, the Talmud spoke to the ideology of its time, and for its time it was right. I speak from the higher ideology of my time, and for my time I am right. That is indeed a bold statement. But is it possible to leave everything behind, start fresh, and create an entirely new vocabulary? In the Torah this week, we're reading about Isaac and Rebekah, the second set of ancestors in our tradition. And if we understand Abraham about being all about innovation and creating a new language of faith, then Isaac in some ways is just the opposite. His life is all about conservation, retaining and renovating the work of those who came before him. We see this clearly in our Torah text. Isaac marries Rebekah and moves into his mother's tent, Sarah's tent, now that she had died. They don't build something new. They conserve the lessons of the generation that came before. It seems that Isaac and Rebekah were into recycling way before that was cool. And similarly, it tells us that Isaac redug the wells of his father Abraham, the wells that had fallen into disrepair and in some cases had been stopped up by the malice of the Canaanite tribes that surround them. Crucially, this text tells us that in redigging these wells, Isaac gave them the very same names that his father gave them in the past. If Abraham is about discovery, Isaac is about rediscovery, of finding the value in the old ways. He's not looking for a new vocabulary, but in finding meaning in the old forms, the old words. It is perhaps an apt metaphor for our present moment, a moment unprecedented in our lifetime. This time of pandemic is forcing rapid change. We, in fact, are creating a new vocabulary. A year ago, if you had used the term social distancing with one of your friends, they would have no idea what you were talking about. And there are terms like COVID itself, viral load, monoclonal antibody, remdesivir, and this week, a new one, bamlanivimab. All these things are indeed an entirely new vocabulary that we're creating. So we are creating these new words and new ways of being in the world, becoming experts on Zoom, for example. There is a new normal that we must commit to for the sake of survival. And yet, we also look to the past and hope it is not completely lost. We want to redig our father's wells and reclaim our mother's tent. We have no choice but to go forward. We are not in Anatevka anymore. What will we hold on to? What will we conserve as we go forward? It's too soon to know all of the answers to that question, but the history of our people teaches that even in places where Judaism was forbidden, it survived. In concentration camps during World War II, behind the Iron Curtain, even in places where it was allowed, but we were just so outnumbered by people of other faiths in small towns dotted across the United States, we have managed to keep our mother's tent and our father's well. Now, this doesn't just happen. It takes resolve and determination to be Isaac and Rebekah, but it can be done. The task falls to each of us. Wherever we go, whatever comes our way, we carry some of our past with us. In architecture, that would be called postmodernist, a style that embraces not only Mies van der Rohe's minimalism, but brings back some of the older styles of architecture in new and delightful ways. Without skin and bones, there is no life. But it is the ornamentation, the beauty, the memory, the recreation of old forms in new ways that makes life worth living. So we may not be able to gather in a sanctuary of architectural beauty, but the architecture of the heart remains. We are in many places, many homes, but we are still together, preserving a community of hope and light as we enter into a season of darkness. This week, we left a light on to commemorate Kristallnacht, and before too long, we will light the lights of Hanukkah. And as we do these things, we remember our ancestors and their struggles against the dark. We learn from them and carry it forward. In a time of darkness, we must become the light. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen.
Yesher Koach. We leave a light on in our homes, and we leave a light on in our souls for all those who've passed away, our loved ones whom we think of right now. As we say the words of the Kaddish Tome, the Mourner's Kaddish, of course, we will read names at our 6:30 Zoom gathering, but right now we invite you to name the people in your own hearts and your own souls as together we say the words of the Kaddish. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shmei Rabbah, Be'alma, Divrach Ute, Be'amlich Machute, B'chayachon, U'vyomechon, U'vchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala U'bizman Kariv V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach, Le'olam Ulomei Almaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitalev, V'yitalal, Shmei Dekudusha, B'richu, Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran b'alma v'yimru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru, Amen. May God, the source of peace, send peace to all of us who mourn, and comfort to all who are bereaved, and let us all say, Amen.
Amen. Our closing song, I think, is going to be Adon Olam, and this is a really good example of something that those are old words, right? Those are, it's not new vocabulary, but actually Adon Olam, like few other prayers in our tradition, can have so many different forms, so many different melodies. It's one of those things that you can sing it to all kinds of melodies, new and old. So Cantor tells me that this is a French Jewish melody, a version of Adon Olam, that even if you don't know this form, you certainly know its vocabulary, the story, a song about God.
That's right. And we'll also just give a shout out to the beauty of French Jewish culture and the perseverance of spirit of the French people. And it's wonderful to lift that up this Shabbat. So let's sing along with Adon Olam to this beautiful melody, timeless melody and words.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra leit nasa b'chefso kol azai melech shemo nikra azai melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kichot hakol לבדו ימלוך נורא, והוא היה, והוא עובר, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא אחד ואין שני, להמשיל לו להחבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה, ולא העוז והמשרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, בצור חרני ביתרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, בידו אף קיבלותי, הייתי שון בעירה, באמרותי גביעתי, אדוני לי ולא אירא, אדוני לי ולא אירא.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.